Drink your tea, Sandra. It's getting cold. You can't let this continue. Sandra, it's got to stop. How many more times will you let him?
He loves me.
Oh.
He really, really loves me. I know he does, and I love him too. Very much.
Look at your face, Sandra. Take a good look in the mirror. Is that what you call love, huh?
Well, he doesn't mean to. He doesn't. And he's always really sorry once he realises what he's done. Well, look at this. Look, isn't this beautiful? Paul bought it for me for my birthday. Look, see, read it. See, he does love me.
Sandra, I will love you forever. Paul.
I met Paul when I was 21. It was in the pub near to where I worked. It was my best friend, Lucy's birthday. We were waiting for a few other friends to join us for a drink, after which we intended to go to our favourite restaurant for a meal. When everyone had arrived, I went to the bar to buy us a round. As I approached the bar, I stupidly dropped my purse. Coins scattered everywhere. But the pub by this time was quite busy, and I began to feel embarrassed as, on my hands and knees, I tried to gather up the coins. Suddenly, I heard a voice. A man's voice. Soft, gentle, and kind. "Can I help?" he said, as he knelt beside me. I smiled and nodded. When the coins were safely back in my purse, he said, "Can I buy you a drink?" I looked over to where my friends were sitting and shrugged my shoulders, saying, "Oh, sorry, it's my friend's birthday and, well, we're all going for a meal soon." "Oh, come on. I'm sure you have time to join me for a quick drink before you go." His smile oozed charm. He took me by the hand and led me to the bar. He introduced himself as Paul. He was so attentive. And he made me feel special. He said that I was the prettiest woman that he had seen in a very long time. He took my hand and he kissed it and asked me my name. "Sandra," I said. "No boyfriend, Sandra?" I explained how I'd recently ended a 2-year relationship when I found out that David had slept with someone who I thought was a friend. "Silly man," said Paul. "Who on earth would want to risk losing such a wonderful woman like you? He must have been a fool." I smiled and blushed. He took my hand and whispered, "Do you have to go for a meal with your friends?" I looked over to where they were all sitting. Their laughter, boosted by wine, rang loud. I looked back at Paul, and I knew that he sensed that, given the choice, I wanted to be with him. We spent the night together in his studio flat, which overlooked the river. Come morning, as I lay in his arms, I knew that Paul was the man that I wanted to be with forever. Or I knew he felt the same way, especially when he suggested that we rent a flat and live together. Can you imagine my joy? I had never been so happy. It was a small ground floor flat with a lovely garden. It was quite expensive, but we managed. Paul said that one day we would have our own house and we could start thinking about children, and we would be one big, happy family. Over the coming months, my love for Paul grew and grew. Well, so much so that I began to feel how lost and heartbroken I would be if he was no longer a part of my life. Well, he wasn't the easiest to live with, Paul. He could be moody, difficult, and sometimes quite critical of me. For example, he hated my hairstyle. He said that it made me look too tarty and suggested that I change it. We looked through some hairstyle magazines together, and Paul pointed out what I thought was a rather plain and harsh cut. But he said that it would suit me and that it would enhance my prettiness. To please him, I went to the hairdressers and I got it styled exactly like the picture. When I came home, he took me in his arms and held me and kissed me. And he said, "You look beautiful, Sandy." I was right, wasn't I? About your hair. Yes. Of course, Paul was always right. Mum and Dad thought Paul was a really, really nice young man, polite and considerate. Linda said that he was okay, and as long as I was happy, well, that was all that really mattered. I never met Paul's family. He said that owing to a rift, well, he hadn't seen or heard from them in years. I asked him about it, but he turned on me angrily. "It's nothing to do with you, Sandra. I don't want to talk about it. Do you understand?" Yes. Yes, of course. We had been living together for about a year when Paul asked me to marry him. Marry you? Are you serious, Paul? Really? He gently kissed me. "Of course I am." He held me so tight, as if he would never let me go. Our wedding took place just a few months later, a registry office with just family and a few friends as guests, after which we all went to our favourite local restaurant for a meal. Our honeymoon was wonderful. We spent a glorious week in Devon. Paul never left my side. When we returned home, I began to notice subtle differences in the way that Paul spoke to me. He had always been a little unpredictable, but now he became irritable and impatient, often becoming angry with me for no apparent reason. Well, I didn't worry too much, though. I mean, this was Paul, and I loved him. One evening, I came home from work a little late. Paul asked where I'd been, and I explained I'd stayed on late to finish some last-minute paperwork. He came towards me, shouting and accusing me of seeing someone. Of course I haven't, Paul. Of course I haven't. I love you. I have you. Why would I want to see someone else? I laughed nervously. He raised his hand and he slapped my face. Shocked, I began to cry. And he slapped me again. I ran into the bedroom and I lay sobbing on the bed. And then Paul came in. Gently, he picked me from the bed and held me in his arms, rocking me as if I were a child. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, over and over again. I love you so much. Please forgive me. Sometimes I cannot believe that someone as lovely as you can love me the way you do. I looked up at him and gently touched his face. Of course, Paul. Of course, I will never, ever leave you. I promise. I promise with all my heart. How could I leave someone who loved me so much? Besides, I would never be able to cope on my own. Later that evening, as we sat watching television, Paul announced, I want you to give up working, Sandra. We can manage perfectly well now on just my salary. Well, I explained that I love my job. I loved it so much and I couldn't bear the thought of quitting. Paul rose, turned off the television and walked slowly towards the door. I said, I want you to give up working. If you love me, you will do this. His tone was quiet, but threatening. Do it, Sandra. Do it. I handed in my notice and left work just a few weeks later. After all, Paul was only doing what he thought was best for me. He did it in a funny, roundabout way, but I loved him all the more for it. There was still the occasional punch or push. Sometimes a slap. After which he would often cry and beg me to forgive him. He never meant to hurt me, though. Not really. I felt lonely being on my own while Paul was at work all day. He didn't like me to go out on my own because, well, he feared for my safety. He was continually worrying about me. That was Paul. He had my best interests at heart. I'd lost contact with my friends. Paul said that they were a bad influence on me, always asking me out for a meal or for a drink. You're married, Sandra. We have one another. We don't need anyone else, do we? Of course. Paul was right. He always was. When Paul wasn't working, we would go out shopping. He'd help me choose clothes. He didn't like my style very much. You see, I loved bright colours. But Paul said that they made me look like a fat clown. I had put on a little weight since the wedding, but not too much. But Paul was right. It was about time that I started to dress more appropriately. After all, I was now a wife, and one day I would be a mother. So it was only right that I wear clothing that was more sedate and classic in design. Paul cared for me, you see, very much. And I considered myself very, very lucky. I would die without him. He was my everything, and I wanted nothing more than to be his forever. Without him, I would be meaningless. We didn't see my family very much. Paul grew to distrust them. I don't know why, but he came to suspect that they were trying to split us up. Oh, well, I'm sure they weren't. But Paul insisted he was right. My parents and sister had seen me with the occasional black eye or bruises on my arm. I told them that such marks were down to my own clumsiness. I was always bumping into things. I don't think that they believed me. Linda hated Paul. Sometimes I would slip out and go and see her. She lived barely a 20-minute walk away. We'd have a cup of tea and some biscuits. Ginger snaps were my favourite. She told me that she didn't believe me about the marks and bruises that she so often saw on my face and arms. No one is that clumsy, Sandra. For goodness sake, see the man for what he is and get out. Leave him. No, I could never leave him. He's my life. We didn't see my mum or dad at all now. Paul said that he felt uncomfortable around them and that it was unfair of me to make him go and see them. Well, he was right, of course. I was being selfish. And besides, I could always go and see them on my own once in a while. No, you will not go and see them ever again. Do you understand? He slapped my face hard, and I began to cry. He grabbed my arm and he shook me. They hate me, Sandra. They hate me. If you go and see them alone, it will seem as if you are supporting that hate. And then he kissed me and held me tightly. And you don't want to do that, do you? Especially as you love me so much. Of course, Paul was right. I didn't see my parents again. And it broke my heart. During one of my sneaky visits to Linda's, I would phone Mum and Dad for a quick catch-up. I would use Linda's mobile. I didn't have a phone of my own. Paul had taken it away, saying that, well, I could always use his if I wanted to make a call. And it seemed sensible, really, seeing as there were so few people that I would ever need to contact. Mum and Dad continued to worry for me. I told them not to, though, because, well, I was fine. I was happy, and despite how things seemed, I was happy. One afternoon, Paul came home early from work. I made him a cup of tea and his favourite sandwich, tuna and sweet corn. We sat and we were laughing and joking and chatting. And then I took his hand and said, "I have got some wonderful news." "Well, go on, what is it?" he said. I could hardly conceal my joy. "I'm pregnant! I'm pregnant, Paul, I'm pregnant! He came towards me, took my hands and raised me from the chair. He whispered that this was the happiest day of his life. He was going to be a father. We were going to have our baby after 4 years of waiting and hoping. "We will be the perfect family," he said, half laughing and half crying. Perfect. I was about 3 months pregnant when Paul came home a little earlier than usual, only to discover that Linda was putting on her coat, preparing to leave. She just stopped by on the way from her shopping trip. She just wanted to see how I was. Ignoring Paul's presence, she kissed me and said, "Take care." She left, and fear gripped me, and like it had never done before. I had got used to fear over the years, but this was different. Paul came towards me and I saw the anger etched on his face and the cruelty in his eyes. I tried to speak, but fear silenced me. He grabbed my arm and he spoke to me in a cold and vicious tone. "I told you never to invite any member of your family to our house." I tried to speak, to explain that Linda, she'd only been here for a few minutes. She just wanted to see how I was. That's all. I knew what was about to happen. And I begged, "Please, please, please, Paul, please think of our baby, please, I'm begging you." Paul was lost in the midst of a rage. He didn't even hear my pathetic cries, begging him to stop. Hearing my screams, the people in the flat above called the police. Paul was arrested. I was taken to hospital. I lost my longed-for baby. "Do you want to press charges, Sandra?" I was asked. I couldn't. It was my fault. If I hadn't have let Linda in, none of this would happen. I lost my baby. I couldn't bear to lose Paul as well. I wouldn't be able to cope without him. I needed him. I needed him now more than ever. The loss of our baby, due to Paul's rage, seemed to subdue him. He was gentle and kind towards me, and it seemed that he could not forgive himself for what he had done. We had been married almost 5 years when Paul bought me a puppy. Oh, she was adorable. I called her Poppy. She followed me everywhere. I loved her dearly. She brought healing into my life when all else had failed. I didn't notice Paul's growing jealousy. It was only when he said, "I think you love that bloody dog more than you love me," that I began to worry. One morning, I'd just finished giving Poppy her breakfast. Paul came in and asked for a mug of tea. I poured him one, and he sat at the table, drinking it slowly. He never took his eyes off Poppy. Suddenly, he stood up and shouted, "Damn dog!" He threw the mug at Poppy. She squealed pathetically as the hot liquid scalded her side. I rushed forward and I grabbed her. I ran towards the door, and grabbing my bag, I ran out onto the street. I just kept running and sobbing. I stopped a passing taxi and arrived at Linda's within minutes. Linda opened the door and I pushed Poppy into her arms. "Please, Linda, please, please, please look after her, please. I'm begging you, look after her." Linda looked at me and I ran. I ran before she could say anything. But on the way back, I started to walk slowly. My heart was racing. What am I doing? Why am I going back to him? Why, after what he had done to Poppy? What? Why? I couldn't answer that question. All I knew was that I had to. I had to go back to him. He would be feeling awful after what had happened, and I needed to be with him. I needed to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, not intentionally. He threw the mug. Well, yes, but he didn't mean to hit her. She got in the way. Yes, that was it. She got in the way. Didn't she? As I put my key in the lock and opened the door, I noticed that Paul was standing, staring out of the window. He turned to face me. Consumed with rage, he raised his hand and, frozen with fear, I closed my eyes.
I'll never forget that expression on your face, Sandra, when you pushed the little whimpering puppy into my arms. You looked lost and broken. I begged you to stay, promising that Tony and I would look after her. You shook your head, turned and ran. I stood clutching Poppy, watching helplessly as you ran as fast as you could, towards home, towards Paul, towards your death. I didn't like Paul from the moment I met him, but of course you knew that, Sandra, didn't you? His charm was false and his presentation was insincere. May have fooled others, but didn't fool me. Do you remember how, when Paul was at work, you would occasionally sneak out and visit me? We'd sit and chat over a mug of tea and eat ginger snaps. Well, they were your favourites, weren't they, Sandra? Do you remember when you were about 6 and you hid a packet of ginger snaps in the shoebox in the toy cupboard? Well, when Mum found the biscuits, she went mad. Not only did you steal them, Sandra, you've also been eating them. Well, of course I've been eating them, Mummy. Ginger snaps are meant to be eaten. You giggled even more, causing me to laugh, and Mum, unable to suppress her laughter, joined in. This mixture of giggles and loud laughter filled our bedroom. "What's going on up there?" shouted Dad. "Trying to watch the bloody football." You called down, "Daddy, you said a bad word. No ginger snaps for you." Well, Dad didn't reply, but we heard him chuckle as he went back into the living room to watch the football. You were such a funny little girl. Always happy and always laughing. No one could resist your outgoing personality. I remember how you cried when your favourite cuddly toy, little dog, lost an eye. "Mummy, Mummy, Bertie's lost an eye and I can't find it anywhere. Please, can you help me find it? Because he won't be able to read to me at bedtime with just one eye." Well, we didn't like to tell you that Bertie wouldn't be able to read you even if he had 6 eyes, because he was, after all, only a toy. But to you, Bertie was real. Dad came to the rescue. Searching through the button tin, he found a green glass stud and he showed it to you and said, "Now we can't find Bertie's eye, Sandra, but look, I found this beautiful green eye at the bottom of the garden next to the roses. I think a fairy must have left it there, especially for Bertie." You smiled and you took the stub from Dad. "Oh, well, it must be a magic eye if the fairies left it." Your look of innocent wonderment is something that I'll always remember. Bertie's new eye fitted him perfectly, and the next morning at breakfast you announced, "Oh, Bertie can see even better than before. He read me 2 stories last night." We looked at one another and smiled. You were a delight, Sandy. Sheer delight. I asked you one day if you'd given any thought to what you wanted to do when you grew up. Well, you pursed your lips and raised your eyes to the ceiling, your favourite thinking pose. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't mind going to the moon, and then I could be friends with all the moon people. Or I might like to be a vet, or one of those people on the telly that tells everyone when it's going to rain. One day, I'd like to get married, like Mummy and Daddy, and have 22 children. I laughed, because you always made me laugh. Throughout the years that followed, you remained happy and fun-loving. Everyone loved you. People gravitated towards you, wanting to be your friend. You rarely cried, but if you did, laughter quickly followed. When I was 23, I married Tony. It was a beautiful wedding, wasn't it, Sandy? You were chief bridesmaid, and at just 16, you looked beautiful. When you left school, you trained to be a vet. Well, it didn't surprise us, because your love of animals was apparent from the moment you could crawl. If Dad as much tried to swat a fly, you cry shouting, "No, Daddy, no, don't hurt him, he's on his way home from work." Well, we didn't like to tell you that flies didn't go out to work because we wanted you to stay in your imaginary world of fantasy for as long as you could. I think a year later, you met David. Nice enough guy, but pretty dull. He was your first real love, though, and you wouldn't have a bad word to say about him. You seemed quite happy together. David, with his introvert personality and bad roll jokes, was a complete contrast to the zany, fun-loving, kind and caring young woman that you'd become. Was it 2 years you've been together? Yeah? I think it must have been. Remember how you turned up on our doorstep one evening in floods of tears? It took a glass of wine and a couple of ginger snaps for you to emotionally settle enough to tell us what happened. Well, I found out this morning that David has been seeing, in fact more than just seeing, my so-called best friend, that cow Maggie. We're drinking another glass of wine and continually dipping your fingers into the biscuit tin. I watched, and I could sense that, although you were upset and a little hurt, losing David was, as far as you were concerned, not the end of your world. When it was time to go, you took another biscuit and you made your way to the front door. You kissed me goodnight and giggled. Didn't like his silly jokes anyway. It was time now for me to read the children their bedtime story. And as I made my way upstairs, I smiled. Sandra would be fine. She'd soon get over David and his betrayal. She was like that. Sandra could move on with the speed of a racehorse and never look back. The future and what it held beckoned her with thoughts of a happy new beginning. And then she met Paul. Have you ever had to stand by and watch? Or someone you love changes from a bright, gregarious, fun-loving young woman into a frightened little mouse, fragile shell of her former self? We did. Mum cried herself to sleep at night. Dad, he'd sit in his favourite chair staring at the television, half watching, half listening. Now and again, he'd clench his fists and silently move his lips. I knew that Dad was lost inside his head, imagining that Paul stood silent and still in front of him, allowing Dad to do to Paul what he longed to do, beat him. Beat him! Just as you had been beaten! And you begged him to stop. Oh, Sandy, why didn't you let us help you? Mum and Dad, they'd have been there for you. Tony and I would have welcomed you in with open arms. You needn't have died, Sandy! You needn't have died. Oh, I know. You feared for our safety. Dad reported Paul to the police once, and in return, he threw a brick through the living room window and spray painted Dad's car. But he reserved the greater punishment for you, so we didn't dare interfere again. Not for the sake of our safety, but for yours. Your neighbours upstairs, they tried to intervene once when they heard Paul shouting and you crying. Jason came down, and when Paul opened the door, he asked, "Is everything okay?" Well, of course it wasn't. But at least Jason's question had warned Paul that his treatment of his wife had been noticed and someone was about to start asking questions. Paul put his hand on Jason's shoulder and smiled. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Jason shrugged, just wondered. Paul grabbed Jason by the arm. If I was you, I'd stop wondering, got it? Jason nodded, door closed in his face. That night, that awful night when you lost your baby, Jason phoned the police. Despite the possible consequences, he couldn't stand by and allow Paul's treatment of you to continue. Paul was arrested and you were taken to hospital. We came to see you, but you begged us to stay for just a few minutes because Paul was coming to the hospital to take you home. So Mum sobbed, unable to accept why you hadn't pressed charges. Dad, he stood clutching your hand. Oh, don't go home with him, Sandy. Come with us. We'll protect you. You withdrew your hand from Dad's and spoke quietly. I love him, Dad. I need him. Please try to understand. No more to be said. With my arm around Mum, we returned home. Dad, he sat in silence, his face pale and tear-stained. Mum went straight up to bed. Tony and I, we left at the sound of Mum's sobs. When you arrived home, you noticed almost immediately that Jason and his wife had moved quite suddenly, so it seemed. Flat upstairs was now empty, waiting for new tenants to arrive. I'll never forget that evening when I opened the door to you and you placed Poppy into my arms. Before I could say much, I just watched as you ran in the direction towards home. We sat by your bedside in intensive care. Your beautiful face was battered and bruised, and your body was broken. I reached out and I took your hand in mine and I squeezed it gently. I'm so sorry, said the doctor. We're doing all we can, placing his hand on Mum's shoulder to offer comfort. I must warn you, the prognosis is far from hopeful. Still clutching your hand, I spoke to you in the wild hope that you might hear me. Poppy's doing well, Sandy. She's happy and playful. The kids love her. You've got nothing to worry about. I promise I will look after her. You slowly opened your eyes and turned your head towards me, and the trace of a smile touched your lips. Slowly and painfully, you uttered a few words. Am I dead? No, my darling sister. Of course you're not dead. Your smile widened. Waking up dead. How silly of me. You closed your eyes, and we watched heartbroken as your life slowly ebbed away. That same evening, we were informed that Paul was dead. For some reason we'll never understand, he removed the locket from Sandra's neck and he placed it in his pocket. Unaware that he'd already murdered Sandra, he stormed out of the flat, already half drunk. He made his way to the pub. Owing to his loud drunkenness, he was asked to leave, barely able to stand, cursed those who tried to help him. He made his way to the busy main road and stood on the curb waiting to cross, which, given his drunkenness, proved to be a difficult task. His judgment was poor, and he staggered blindly into the road, only to fall under an oncoming bus. He died instantly. No way the driver could have avoided the accident. My dear Sandy, you never ever leave my thoughts. Paul, I hope you rot in hell!
I returned Sandra's locket to Linda. She was sitting by the window watching Tony as he mowed the lawn. His face was pale and expressionless, and his eyes were those of little sleep and grief. He'd been fond of Sandra, always referring to her as Snappy Sandra, given her love of ginger snaps. He saw her as the younger sister he never had, and loved her for her quick wit and zany personality. His own grief was compounded by that of his wife's. Linda was inconsolable. And Tony felt inadequate and helpless owing to the fact that whatever he said or did made little, if any, difference to Linda's depth of grief. I sat holding her hand. She stared at the locket and swiped it from the table and sobbed. I could not console her. She was drowning in grief. I left the house and I walked slowly home. It was raining. Didn't have an umbrella, I didn't care. I lifted my face to the rain in the mad hope that I could wash away some of those feelings of sadness and anger and inadequacy which I always felt when working on cases such as these. When I got home, did I sink down on the sofa, kick off my shoes and sip a gin and tonic while watching some meaningless show on TV? No. I had a shower. Just hoping to wash away those images of a battered young woman, a woman who still might be alive today had she just allowed us to help her. But Paul, he'd moulded her into a woman with no identity, a woman whose life was structured and organised, a woman that believed that only he was right, a woman so dependent and so frightened of him that any display of affection was met with the same enthusiasm as a neglected dog thrown a bone. Paul was arrested once for beating his wife so badly that she miscarried of a child she so dearly wanted. Was Paul charged? No. Sandra wouldn't even consider this, telling me it wasn't really Paul's fault, it was hers. If she hadn't allowed Linda into the house, then none of this would have happened. No matter what he said, no matter how many times he was violent to her, it was always her fault. Paul could do no wrong in her eyes. She saw a man that she loved, a man that she would defend, no matter what kind of punishment he meted out to her. We saw a man who was cold and callous, a man who every time he hugged her or kissed her, it was no more than a prelude to further abuse. Sandra's family tried to help their daughter by reporting him to the police and begging Sandra to return home, promising that Paul would never be able to hurt her again. Paul retaliated with a brick through the window and spray paint over the father's car. And Sandra? Broken arm. It was then that Sandra's family stepped back, afraid that any further interference would result in something far worse than a broken arm, which, sadly, it did. Just imagine how her family felt. Not only had they lost a beloved daughter, but they undeservedly blamed themselves for her death. And that guilt is something they will live with for the rest of their lives. As I lie here in the dark trying to sleep, sadness stings my eyes with tears. Sandra's family will never come to terms with her murder, and I will never come to terms with the fact that had she just allowed us to help her, had she trusted us, she might still be alive today, sitting at Linda's table and drinking tea and dunking ginger snaps, sharing inconsequential gossip and arranging a day to go shopping together for brightly coloured girly clothes. Sandra had become little more than a puppet. Paul pulled the strings and she jumped. If he cut those strings, she'd fall to the floor, silently begging him to take back control. Why? Not only because she loved him, but because she felt alone and inadequate, helpless without him. She depended on Paul for her very existence because without it, she felt worthless. Even now, as I lie here, trying to sleep, I can hear my own voice calling out in the dark. Please, don't suffer like this. Come to us, put your trust in us. Speak to us, we will keep you safe, we will protect you. The time has come to live your lives and not allow the Pauls of this world to live it for you. Please, let us help you. I will read to you some of the case notes from the original transcript used in the trial. We offered Sandra help, but she refused us because she hoped that one day everything would be fine. After all, she loved Paul and she trusted him. She said, "He will never really hurt me." She said this over and over. "He loves me and all too often it's my fault when he loses his temper. I'm not an easy person to live with. He told me that and he's right. But we can put you in touch with a range of independent support services, people who understand what you're going through." "Oh no, I'm all right. I can deal with Paul's funny ways. Please don't worry about me. I'm fine. Truly, I am. Together with our partners, we may be able to help you move away and place you somewhere where you'll be safe." "No, no, I could never do that. It's my home. It's where I belong, with Paul." "We can help you obtain a non-molestation order for free from the civil court. We can get him out and we can make him stay away by using a domestic violence protection order." "Oh, no, I don't want Paul to stay away. No. Don't you understand? I love him. I want him near me and loving me. We can provide you with a special mobile number or a panic alarm, Sandra. If you're being threatened or abused, you simply press a button and it will connect you to us immediately. We can also make your home safer." "Thank you, but no. I don't need that. If anything really awful happens to me, I would come to you, promise. But it won't. It won't." Sandra, we can use Claire's law, which means we could check Paul's background and see if he's ever been abusive to a previous partner. What? My Paul would never have hurt anyone. Anyway, what's past is past, and what matters to me most is my love for him. Without Paul in my life, I may as well be dead. But you are, Sandra. You are. You're not alone. 2 women are murdered in the UK every week following domestic abuse, and 400 take their own lives to escape it. There's so much we can do to help women like Sandra. Just come to us, speak to us, cry out your pain. Please, let us help you.